Josh and I, our offices are like connected sort of because we have the old Emerald studio. So it's all the offices are old studios. So like one's the control room, one's
I was there
voiceover.
a few months ago.
Were you?
There in May.
We're only there every now and then.
Right, there was no one there.
It's embarrassing.
Well, no, no, no.
If
It
you
makes
don't
sense.
go on a Tuesday, you ain't gonna see nobody except Aaron down in the basement of the studio.
Actually, Bo was there.
Oh, I love Bo. Yeah. But yeah, she was mentioning this, and it's funny because just talking about which panels people are going to go see, and they're like, "Well, we're going to go to Nan's panel."
Well,
Like,
there's
that's what
also,
they're
I thought she
calling
might
it.
be going to oh, that's funny, going to the neighboring rights.
Well, that was the thing because everybody's been saying that of these two panels, the people have to make a choice because they're
Yeah.
interested in the same people. And we thought, why don't we put a songwriter one against this one? You know, because people are having to make a choice. If you would have put a "How do I make my music better" next to this,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't have people split. But
It's okay.
yeah,
Okay, good. So now you took up my time.
yeah.
So
Now
it's
you,
12:36.
there you
So
go. Well, now if
I'm
you
just going to
wanna-
go take a peek and then I think I'm just going to get
yeah,
started.
just
Yeah?
do the damn thing.
Okay, cool.
We're in a little bit of a holding pattern right now.
Entrez-vous, s'il vous plaît. Hello? Ooh. Boy, girl, yes. Oh, but where does that? My name is Nan Wilson. Go on, Connor. And I'm the oracle at the former Manage Ad Music, now ma'am BMAT. Thank you so much for being here. Me. Started technically music publishing administration company more than 20 years ago, specifically for music and commercials. And September of last year, we were acquired by this music technology company called BMAT. So we still do music administration for music and commercials, but we have way greater resources in terms of technology and our reach to make sure that rights holders get paid, because that's what we really care about. And now, all of our panelists are going to introduce themselves. Is there anything else I should say before I hand it over? Okay, cool. Go on, Connor.
You want me to do it? Hey guys, I'm Connor Marks at APM Music. I've been at APM in the publishing copyright registration role for about 13 years now, 13 years out of APM's 40 years of life. So we were formed as a joint venture back in 1983. We're the exclusive licensor for several large catalogs in Europe, including the KPM, Bruton, Sonaton, Cezanne catalogs. So essentially, in my role, I'm just pumping through tons of data coming in to my database and then sending that data out, making sure that it's correct, sending it to all the different sources of income that we're going to see on the back end royalties. So I'm very ingrained in making sure that metadata is correct, making sure that song information is correct, getting that information to the places, receiving the codes back. And the way that I look at it is every single one of these little codes that I'm sending places is going to have royalties connected to it from these areas. And so we'll get into the specifics of that in this panel. Go ahead.
Thank you, Connor. I'm Renee Meredith. I'm the co-founder and COO of Exploration Group, and we are a music publishing company. We started as a third-party YouTube administrator for publishers, and we eventually grew to be a worldwide music publisher. I started in the business when I was a little kid, being a guitar tech for my grandpa, and eventually grew up and worked at Windswept Publishing and Bug Music and BMG, and was like, if I'm gonna work this hard, I'm gonna work for myself, and went and did it. And we go out and we chase pennies. with the digital platforms. We work a lot with the MLC, who I love. Sarona's awesome, guys. You just got to know that. And we defend copyrights. We like to educate songwriters. We like to help empower them and empower the smaller companies to stand in their power and get their money. And that's what we do. Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, my name is Randy Wackler. I'm the founder of 615 Music in Nashville, Tennessee. Ran that company for a number of years. It is now part of the Warner Music Group. And I went back and I was the CEO of Warner Chappell Production Music for a few years. And then that brings me to now. I've started a new company called 11-1 Music. And, it's this business. Somebody told me last night, they said, when you're in the production music library business, it's kind of like Hotel California. You can't get out, right? So I'm in.
I'm so lucky to be up here with these folks. Hi, my name is Serona Elton. I'm the head of educational partnerships for a relatively new organization called the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or the MLC for short. I am a little heavily branded today, I will admit. I'm at the MLC, but I also have another gig. I am a full-time music industry professor at the University of Miami Frost School of Music, where I teach and I run the music industry program there. And my background actually has been on the major record label side of things, but for many years involved in processing royalties, establishing product metadata standards, and handling mechanical licensing from the record label perspective. That's my own personal background. The MLC, as I mentioned, is a pretty new organization. We'll talk more as we talk about everything about what these different organizations do. But we are quite young, relatively, from an industry perspective, and we're here thanks to a change in the copyright law in the U.S. called the Music Modernization Act, and that really established the MLC, and we'll talk more about why in a little while.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to do some talking, and we are very soon going to open it up to questions, so get ready to ask them. I was thinking that it would be good to give some perspective about where we've come from. So this panel is focused on what we call the back end, which means not the sync fee. There's money that comes after your music performs. So Randy?
Little perspective here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, so it wasn't that long ago when us as composers and publishers, what were we focused on? We were focused on license fees or sync fees and back end, right? Those were the sort of the two things we were, really focused on. Getting your music copyrighted, getting it registered with the PROs.
Performance royalty organizations.
Yeah.
We want to not use whatchamacallums.
Acronyms. ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. And so it doesn't seem like it was that long ago that it was those two things, license fees or sync fees and performance royalties, right? Well, guess what? Now we have all these platforms and social media, and as your music travels through all of these things and gets reshared and played and YouTube TV and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, how do you get paid for those things? And so it's kind of funny, doing the music is the important part. You got to create great music. But then monetizing that, it's almost like it's become, how did it become this complicated to chase all these things? And Connor will tell you, he spends, I think a full-time job really making sure that as your music travels all over the place, that you can get paid for it. And it's a lot of, you really have to keep, I've been doing this almost 30 years, and I'm learning all the time, which actually makes it interesting for me. That's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning, is learning new things. But you really do have to, you got to learn about, monetizing on YouTube and services that do all these things for you. But as a publisher, you either have the staff to do it, or you're going to hire a third-party company to do it. So I think that's what we're going to explore, is how can we chase these nickels that you talked about, right?
And even if you're not a publisher and you're a composer, you still want to do your diligence. This morning when we had a pre-meeting, Sharona actually laid out, she talked about there being 6 kinds of buckets that were related to Backend. Would you recreate that for us, Sharona?
Sure. I'm sorry I don't have a diagram, so you're just going to have to visualize this a little bit with me. There's a lot of questions to ask, and I find that sometimes, there's so many questions it's overwhelming, but if you try to organize them into categories a little bit, it can help you keep it straight in your mind. And so what we were talking about, and you've already heard a couple terms thrown out up here: performance royalties, mechanical royalties. And let's talk about sort of a third category, which you might consider user-generated content or sort of micro-sync. In other words, it's sort of royalties that are generated from video social platforms, YouTube, places like that, when those videos are streamed, which is different than that upfront sync payment for the actual placement in the first place, right? So in terms of making sure you're not missing out on money, I'm a big fan of making lists, right? And so if I was gonna sit down and say, let me wrap my head around all of this, I might make like a diagram with 6 squares, okay? And if you imagine like a table, you're just looking at a table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One column is gonna be domestic, and one is gonna be international. And then those 3 rows in this table would be performance royalties, mechanical royalties, UGC, micro sync royalties. And I wish the answer was like, well, why don't I only need one column where like it's one answer for the whole world? Because it's just not the reality. In many cases, although depending on what kind of deal you might end up doing, you might end up entering into some kind of a contract with a party that's going to handle almost everything so that you put their name in most of those boxes, or you might slice and dice it in a lot more of a complex way, but is beneficial to you, where the answer about how are you getting that money in each of those boxes might be different, right? So that's how I would approach it, is thinking through, like, how am I getting paid for performance royalties in my domestic country? How am I getting paid for performance royalties that are generated outside of the United States or whatever your domestic country is? Same question about mechanicals, same question about the UGC microsync. And in each of those 6 boxes, if I haven't lost you already, I mean, I'm seeing some nodding, which is good. You're like 6 boxes. You can follow that much without a diagram. In each of those boxes, there's actually a flow of money that says, like, so if that happens on YouTube, YouTube pays them, and then they pay them, then they pay them, and then pay me, right? In each box, there's like a little flow. Ultimately, you need to know who's paying you in each of those boxes. And again, you might have like 2 solutions for all 6. You might have 6 separate solutions, but I just think that you have to have a solution for each of those. And then there's other stuff that, like if let's say you're a composer and your scores are actually also sold as like printed sheet music, it's a whole nother thing we won't get into. But the key to me is thinking about this list, this 6 box kind of list that makes sure you haven't forgotten something and left some money somewhere.
And the international part, for a lot of you, if you have a sub-publisher, and many of you do, they take care of a lot of that stuff for you.
So that would be your answer in those boxes, perhaps, is this is my sub-publisher, or my sub-publisher in each country, or the sub-publisher that covers these regions, or whatever. But if you have a box on there, you're like, yeah, I have no idea, then you might be missing out on that money. So the key is knowing all the places you should be collecting it from.
And the way that I like to sort of frame it and understand it is to go back to the very fundamentals of the intellectual property rights. So as the copyright owner, you have exclusive rights to perform, to display, to reproduce, and to copy. And those buckets, the performance right, well, let's start with the sync right. I mean, traditionally, like we're selling synchronizations, and then our back-end royalties are the performance royalties for every time that it plays. That's the public performance, if it plays in public. The mechanical rights being the copy of that song. So that basic understanding is what I come back to, and it gets more complicated as we shift into this new media landscape where there's a new OTT, over-the-top box or service, VOD, video on demand. I'm saying all the acronyms and.
Okay. Okay, good.
But I try and apply like the traditional, what I'm used to what it looks like. When something's playing on YouTube, it's a performance. If there's a piece of music going into a video, and a mechanical, because there's a copy on a server somewhere, and if there's music playing underneath audio, that's an audio visual, that's a synchronization. And when we're talking about micro sync is one way to look at it. It's, we haven't necessarily done each of those synchronizations, but we've put our music up onto a service like YouTube or TikTok or Facebook that allows the users there to create their own synchronizations. And then, with that sort of merge, with the future of these royalties, we're looking at, instead of the traditional, lower volume, higher dollar amounts, higher volume, lower dollar amounts. And we're hoping and we're pushing to advocate for that value for us continues to remain constant and grow as the methods of delivery change.
Talk some about what you actually do. Oops, sorry. Talk some into the microphone about what you actually do to get some of these.
You want to start?
Yes.
You want me to start? What we actually do. We're data nerds. I've got 50 people at Exploration that all love spreadsheets, and it's fascinating and wonderful for us. And that's who it should be wonderful for, because as composers and the artistic people, you guys should just worry about what the next piece is. This is my next idea, I'm gonna focus on that.
Not pivot tables? Or VLOOKUPs?
I wasn't gonna say
Now
that,
you're
because
talking
that
about
just
my
like
daily
makes
life
me feel
all
so
day,
warm
That's what I
and
get into.
fuzzy. But what we do, the way
Wait,
that...
hold on. But what she does,
Microphone.
what she does is critical. Somebody's got to do that. Dealing with the data, the spreadsheets, all of that is critical for actually getting money as we move along.
Yeah, you can create the greatest piece of music. It can be in Breaking Bad, and it can be viewed on YouTube 1 billion times. But if your metadata is garbage, see, I didn't say the word. If your metadata is garbage, you're not going to get paid from any source that you're supposed to. So what my team does and what I do is we help to get the metadata straight for our clients.
So hold on.
Yes.
Do you all know what we're talking about? Does anybody not know what we're talking about when we're talking about getting metadata straight?
Cool. Metadata is any data point that's attached to your piece of music. It starts with the title, the composer, songwriter names, their AKAs in some cases, the percentage you own. Go ahead.
Their affiliation.
Their affiliation.
Their unique
There's like
numbers.
a million data points you could end up with. But there are key ones that are most important is if it's just you, I'm going to point you out. If it's just you that wrote it, your name, you own 100%, your song title, and who you're affiliated to, that's enough to get started.
When by affiliation you mean?
ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. I'm assuming you're a U.S. publisher. Or U.S. composer. Composer, yeah. That's enough to get started and get the ball rolling. And then my team goes in and we take that. I'm going to pretend you're my client. You're my client now for the next 5 minutes. And we're going to take that piece and we're going to go out in the world and find out if your song has been used. If you're like, hey, I forgot to turn this in. It's in this show. Here's what I have. We're going to go and we're going to see. We're going to go to the MLC. We're going to be like, did anybody register? Is anybody trying to jump in there on us? And we're going to get that locked down. We're going to deliver it to our sub-publishers so they can lock and load on your foreign royalties and the international buckets she talked about. We're going to make sure that everything's right at the PRO. We're going to make sure it's in YouTube. So when people upload clips of that show out of context, we're going to get that money for YouTube. That's what my team does. That's what your publisher should be working on.
And is this metadata embedded in the audio?
Maybe. Sometimes we don't even get the audio. Sometimes we get the panic phone call. I just saw my song in the show. And I'm like, what song? Which song? I don't have that song yet. Can you send it to me? And that happens a lot. And
But why would it be important for the piece of music that travels around the world to have metadata in the audio? Because if it's separated from the audio, how is it?
How do you get it? Yeah, it is very important. Any place that you can embed that metadata, put it in there. If you can fill out all those fields, put them in there. Even if it's your same name every time, I'm the composer, I'm the producer, I'm the engineer, I'm the masterer. I mean, I think every place needs that data. Every place needs it. And if Spotify is going to play your song and they're going to try to pay the MLC, the more information they have, the more information they give the MLC, the more likely it is you're going to get your money. And credits, I'm just going to take a moment and mention credits, because credits, we need to get credits being back at the forefront of our industry in general for all songs and everybody in the food chain.
What do you mean by credits?
I mean credits like who's the engineer, who's the mastering engineer, what studio were you in? All of these things, they're being very neglected now. We don't have albums with liner notes anymore.
But is there room in the metadata audio fields for all that?
There's not room for all of it, but we fill out a lot of notes. So if somebody wants that data from us, they're going to get it. So.
One way to put it is, if you have a piece of property, you're going to want to identify that property as fully as possible any place you send it to, because your back-end royalties on all these platforms rely on third-party services that don't care about it as much as you to identify that, to be able to pay it. So when I say property, I'm really talking about a song and what identifies the song. It's sort of a unique combination of a title and a writer and maybe a publisher. And then there's a recording of that song, which is a separate piece of property. So identify it with as much as you can, and then I like to really get into codes. And when we're talking about songs, every different society might apply a different code to a song. The ISWC, the International Standard Work Code, is supposed to be that unique identifier for that song.
IPI number?
IPI number, your IPI number, your publisher's IPI number.
That'll identify the specific interested
Yeah,
parties, the
IPI is
composers.
all of the parties.
It all
publisher.
becomes metadata. All of that is metadata. All those little data points. And what I tell my writers is we build out a spreadsheet for our writers, and we say every time you get a new song, every chance you get, fill in as much as you can every time you write. Your co-writers' names are also metadata. And sometimes as a publisher, we need that to get it properly registered somewhere or to solve a problem or something like that. So yeah, that's how we start, is we build out this template shell for our writers. We give it to them, we walk them through it. If they want to know what everything is, we will educate them. And the more you know, the more educated you can be as songwriters and composers, the more powerful you are. And that makes this, the more money you'll make and the better the industry gets.
I'd like to see a show of hands. Composers in the room. Awesome. Publishers in the room, even if you just also raised your hand. Okay, it's kind of split. Okay, cool. Yes? Were you going to say something?
Well, I was just thinking of, pushing to get better, and one thing that we specifically noticed in the industry related to the MMA, the Music Modernization Act, and the creation of the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective.
We're all on brand here.
We're trying so hard not to just throw acronyms at you.
Yeah, but these are all important entities.
Was that pre-MMA, when you as a label would release a song on Spotify through an aggregator or an agent, they weren't really requiring very complete composer and publishing information. So they just say, okay, Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. Now, after the MMA and the MLC, they are requiring more.
To a degree. Like, it's not the case that you cannot get on Spotify without that, right?
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Like, the law did not now, unfortunately, the law did not mandate that those services, put some kind of a roadblock to putting your content up there if it doesn't travel with complete metadata. If they get it, they share it with us, the MLC, which is great, but it's helped make it more visible. Unfortunately, it didn't go as far as I think certainly the publishing community would have loved, which would have been a mandate. We're not there yet. But the good thing is that the digital aggregators that stand in the middle of a lot of content getting up on those services are also becoming more aware and are making it easier for when you submit your recording to them to say, get this out there, here's these other fields you can fill out. Any of them could require it of their customers.
Examples of digital aggregators.
DistroKid, TuneCore, CD Baby. So digital aggregators are a type of company that stands between the supplier of a sound recording, a record label, or a self-released artist, and a digital music service. They're the ones who get the content from the record label, traditionally, or self-released artist, and provide it to the digital services. We call them aggregators because the DSPs. Anybody can sign up with an aggregator. You pay your fee, right? That's different than what we consider distributors, like record labels, indie labels do deals with distributors. Those are negotiated, real business to business type arrangements and they're not just available for anybody to sign up for. Whereas with an aggregator, sign up if it's $20 or whatever it is, come one, come all. Any of those companies could decide, I would love to encourage them to, I encourage you to encourage them to, say, no, if you're gonna put your music out through CD Baby, we will not accept it without you filling out these fields. That would be wonderful.
One thing that's kind of cool that's happened in the last few years is production music is winding up on all these DSPs, Spotify, Apple Music. I'm curious, do most of you, show of hands, have their music on DSPs, on Spotify? See, it's a lot.
Okay.
And that's a cool thing. Get on a playlist and it'll really be worth it.
Yeah. Want to take a little question break. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Because obviously we could just chat. Yes, sir. What's your name? Hey, Jake.
I have two questions. They're kind of specific. So I submit music to libraries like APM. Should I be checking more of those boxes, or does APM collect everything? Those 6 boxes you were talking about.
It depends on.
Yeah, for APM, it will be a requirement of delivery for anything that we receive to then put out to receive all that information, and we get that settled, and that's our job, is to make sure that everything is registered correctly, that we've got the right codes, we've got the registrations with the right parties, and that we're collecting things. And if we're missing anything, we would ask you.
But the one thing you don't collect, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, the writer's share from the PRO. Is that correct or not?
Correct, but we'll make the registration based on the data that we...
So in your box, your 6 boxes, in the performance row, right, you're going to have to list in there that you're getting your performance royalties from whichever PRO you've joined, probably getting both domestic and international from them. You don't have to, but you could, right? And then APM will be in maybe all the other boxes.
And you can go check your writer's account at the PRO and be like, hey, all my songs are here. Yeah.
What was your other question?
Oh, sorry, I was going to say. The other question was this. So you talked about embedding metadata in everything you send. Does that mean on whatever service you're using, you have an opportunity to type it in? Or are you literally embedding it in the file,
You should-
audio file somehow?
Yeah.
There's
Go on.
Microphone. Go ahead.
You can do both. We suggest we have our clients, we want it sent to us with music embedded, metadata embedded in the music file itself.
a lot of my clients just use iTunes to do it. You just open it up, fill in the boxes.
Some other people in this room probably use different platforms. What? Yes.
You can use it in the DAW as well.
Or for Wave and. Okay, hold on just a second. What were you just saying? There's another.
Sorry, DAW, Digital Audio Workstation, Pro
Okay.
Tools, whatever it is you're creating the audio file in, there's also an opportunity in there to enter metadata as part of those files so that it travels in there as well. There's a number of ways. That's one way.
And I'm not sure about the MP3 versus WAV in the iTunes, but definitely in Pro Tools, you can then export it whatever type of file you want, and it's there.
So
Okay.
here's a really, I don't know what kind of question this is. If you make a mistake when you embed in the audio and the audio leaves and it's traveling around the world, can you correct that once it's embedded?
Don't make any mistakes.
Don't.
Don't make any mistakes.
You've taken my wonderful world of data conversation and you've given me nightmares tonight.
Oh, no.
Don't do that.
But it also isn't the
happens
end
all
of
the
the
time.
world in that that embedded data may only be used in some places by some companies for some things, right? We're not in a world, unfortunately, where everything is based on what was embedded. In a lot of cases, what's embedded is completely ignored in how
Yeah.
it's identified. So it could hurt you in the cases where it's used, and maybe there's ways to fix it, but there's other ways where it's not used anyway.
It's
And it's not just a mistake. I mean, publishers sell catalogs, so there's a new owner, you know,
Right.
and so how do you effectively, once it's out there, you know, under one ownership with certain names, how do you change that?
the best way to fix metadata is with human beings. The best way to move data is with software. So there's a lot of companies out there that are like, we're the software company, we're the software, the tech. But guess what? A human being's got to fix that at the MLC. A human being's got to fix it at the PRO. A human being's got to fix the conflict with Universal that you've just created. A human's got to fix it. So you've got to find, and this is personally an industry problem, I think that we need a better relationship with the balance of human beings and tech fixing the metadata problem. And by the way, the MLC's great at that. Because
I feel like they're going to start thinking I paid you guys off or something to say so many nice things. Did not.
Yes, sir. You have another question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as the metadata, because metadata can be changed, do you ever use anything like invisible watermarks for security purposes to track these sort of things? And if so, what software do you use for that?
usually I rely on our artist teams. If they want to embed a watermark, we only ask for it if we know it's a high level pre-release that we're getting delivered. Other than that, if it's something that's already been released, the release date's passed, we don't really ask for any watermark.
So just like, if you're a publisher and you're trying to give people the peace of mind, the comfort that their music is not going to get stolen, because everybody values their own music like it's the Rolling Stones. But I'm just, if you think that just like the information on a file is enough security, that's not getting changed and reused.
A lot of it comes with your relationship with your publisher. Like, I'm not going to pitch until you tell me I can pitch. And I'm going to remind you that the moment you tell me to pitch, it's in the marketplace. And so if you don't, that's kind of like my rules for my team that we're out there when we're putting music out there to be used for syncs. So, yeah, it is different for libraries. I think it comes down to if you as the composer and the artist or the company representing it, I think it comes down to your comfort level and the standard that you want to have. And you have every right in the world to protect it that way.
Well, yeah, and
You have a better answer.
it's again, we're trying to identify our property right, and I like to say that if I could restart the entire industry and just start from scratch, new audio files, watermark everything, and then have the scanners that can read those watermarks listening to everywhere that it's being broadcast. Then you tracked everything. You can't do that now because there's so much music there. So, I think watermarks have their place, and, they give you a lot of information, but you have to have something reading those as well. And then versus fingerprinting, which is, identifying based on the unique waveform fingerprint, you don't have to preload that stuff like a watermark, but, so that's sort of the future of identification is these fingerprint things. And again, you're going to have issues with that, false positives, people using different loops, the same loop in different songs, and then those sections. So for me, it sometimes brings up the important things of give your music to one party. It should be exclusive. Your rights should be exclusive per agent, per territory. There shouldn't be any crossover because that gets in the way of it.
He's talking about retitling.
Yeah. So when you put a watermark in the piece of audio, let's say it gets cut up into a 15 and a 30, travels around, gets something added to it. Does it change the watermark? Does that survive all this editing and voiceover and sound effects and traveling around and all? Do you know?
I don't know. That's a good question. Like, how much can you mess up the watermark or change it?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Oh, well, you take the...
No. There will be some parts that may be retained, but the watermark is pretty much specifically associated with that specific music file. And if you take a 30 and you're pulling out a 10, the watermark is no longer relevant.
Interesting.
Well, for the 10. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, kind of on the same subject, like, maybe like if we have a song that say it's 10 years old, you got to cut, or a placement with like something non-X or maybe direct to soup or something like that, and then now you're saying, and maybe it's been put, I kind of refer to microsync or some of these newer technologies, and then now, but since you still own the song, you say, hey, I'm either gonna put this non-X thing, or since I own it outright, I'm gonna sign with say APM. You guys, are you now? I haven't done anything to the file. Are you going to individually watermark so that you then place it, or it ends up on Twitch or TikTok or YouTube when the ad rep comes in, that it's identified to your license and not just something that's been done before? That's kind of like what I worry about, especially like music that I've had for a while.
What would you do, Connor?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. If you become the owner of a piece of property at this date, past licenses in perpetuity remain in effect, right? We have no share of that. But there are things that just sort of go over blanket-wise. If I become your publisher, I will collect 100% of the publisher's share of public performance revenue from ASCAP and BMI, and some of those residual payments will be related to past syncs.
I guess I'm meaning more like using like YouTube, for example. If you were to fingerprint that, both things are going to show up. So if it wasn't individually like watermarked by the publisher or the library, then I'd seem like there's a conflict with who collects, I guess.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is the challenge of YouTube's fingerprinting. So we have libraries approach us to represent them, and we have to go through this every time we get a catalog where we've gotten a retitle, or we've gotten a song that say APM already has, but now we have it too, and YouTube's system will say, hey, Exploration, you've got your fingerprint matches APM's fingerprint, so you two go fight it out, and you tell us who wins, and you've got 30 days. And if you don't tell us, then you're both, bye. It's out. Yeah. So you kind of have to have a good relationship with your rep, with whoever's representing you on YouTube, or if you're in your own SRAV agreement. And you've got to have good relationships. Like I got a good relationship with Connor. I'm just going to call him and be like, hey, let's figure this out. And it's difficult sometimes because YouTube's only going to let one version of that fingerprint live in its system. Yeah. So you have to be careful.
I don't want to do you guys wrong. So it's like, as a catalog, it's so big over so many years. Like I've got all these spreadsheets, like trying to keep track of who has what for how many years and whatnot. But like I would, and it does gets harder and harder to keep track of. It seems like watermarking is a good solution overall.
Yeah, I mean, essentially in the lack of a watermark, in this scenario, one way that we see this and we deal with it is that if I take your asset on YouTube, like your sound recording asset, and I control it moving forward, that's an exclusive thing for the U.S. for me. You might have granted a license to someone, a year ago to post as many videos on YouTube of this cut that they've done. They will potentially post it. They'll get a claim from me. I won't have a record of them licensing it, but then you can tell me, hey, this was my client before, this is all good, and we'll release the claim and let them do what they need to do.
It seems like for new music being written now and being released, a watermark would work better, and of course, fingerprinting for legacy stuff is the way to go. Would you say that's a good statement? No?
I say fingerprint everything.
Yeah.
Fingerprint it all, because
And watermark for the new stuff?
if you wanna, but I definitely do the fingerprinting part.
Because that's what most detection systems are using. They're using fingerprinting. And also, you don't have to fingerprint it yourself.
YouTube does it when
So
it's
if
uploaded.
you're concerned with ad revenue share, ad revenues, you're sending it to a content ID provider, that provider will fingerprint it. If you're concerned about getting your performance royalties, particularly at ASCAP and BMAT, you're sending all of your tracks to SoundMouse. They will fingerprint it. If you want to independently find out where your stuff is running, you'd either send it to TuneSat or BMAT or Source Audio watermarks, but TuneSat and BMAT fingerprint. But the large majority of detection services today use fingerprint because of what Connor said. There's so much stuff, there's so many recordings that haven't been watermarked.
And this fingerprinting technology is amazing. I mean, the YouTube fingerprint will find like a composition level of something through a lot of loud screaming crowd noise that's as small as 10 seconds. It has identified some stuff where I'm like, how
Did you hear that? Less than 30.
less than 30?
YouTube will find it.
YouTube's gonna find it less than 30 now.
Yes.
My
Yes.
question is, when will the DSPs catch up? Because I have to deal with so many pirated tracks winding up and being redistributed, and DistroKid will just pump it up, without recognizing that it's actually somebody else's track. So that in that case, the fingerprinting doesn't seem to be working. But there will be content ID claims coming in all day for any pirated tracks.
Good question. I don't-
DSPs,
Well,
we're coming for you.
I think DSPs fall into two categories. Your YouTubes and your other kind of social platforms, TikTok, Facebook, they allow users to upload content, right? And so they have realized over time, with legal pressure and everything else to avoid being sued into oblivion, they have to establish various tools to let content owners identify their content and monetize it. But they operate under this particular section of the law called a safe harbor, and it's a different business model in terms of they're not getting their content, not all of their content, from the true source of that content, right? Just any old person uploads it. Your Spotify's, your Apple Music's, they are getting their content through a supply chain that is supposed to be coming from an authoritative source, the record label. The aggregators like DistroKid and other companies like that, they're taking those legal risks when they let just anybody push stuff up there. So you have to look at that supply chain and say, is it really Spotify's responsibility to be trying to see if somebody else has stolen your sound recording? It could be an authorized sample. Like, they don't use the model at all that YouTube and others use, because YouTube and them are trying to minimize their legal liability. And so they're using fingerprinting to detect the source because it's not coming from the authoritative source. Spotify gets its stuff from a limited number of suppliers compared to like a YouTube, and they know exactly where they got things from, and the parties that have provided that to them are supposed to have made sure they've had the permission. And so I don't think you're gonna see your Apple Musics and your Spotify's changing their like copyright infringement detection model. I think what you'll see is perhaps companies like those digital aggregators, maybe they'll get sued enough times to say, well, wait a minute, we need to put a little bit more kind of guardrails on just letting anybody upload an infringing sound recording. But it's a totally different business model, which creates different levels of incentives for those DSPs to try and build tools to solve for it. And that's my professor answer. The MLC's got nothing to do with that.
The Band-Aid answer that I'll give you is what we do is when we find something, we say something to our client. So if a video gets claimed, If it's just a reaction video, or it's just somebody in their car and it's on the radio, or it's a clip of a TV show, that's in that box. If it's this got matched and we don't know why because the lyrics are different, or there's a rapper over it now or something, like, we will immediately pull it and send it to the client and go, what is this? Is this an authorized sample? Is it not? But again, that's hard to do, but you've got to do it. You work from the top down in claims, and you do the best you can with as many good humans as you can who are paying attention. And if you find it, tell your rep immediately to track it down and be like, okay, this is on
takedown notices. You can
Yeah.
get it taken down.
This is on YouTube. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is on YouTube. It's probably on Spotify. Go look.
Well, is it getting tougher? Because sure, Spotify, I could go sample anything right now and upload it, be on Spotify in 2 days. But if I want to collect every source of revenue, if it's going into a fingerprinting system like YouTube, I'll get a conflict. And then you'll get notified of that conflict too, potentially.
What's made it so challenging is the explosion of royalty-free music licensing platforms. And all of these user-generated content that is using the music and maybe even labeling it as copyright-free music. And so people
Such as like an epidemic?
Yeah, and so they download the music and they upload it to DistroKid and under their own moniker or whatever. So that's what's triggering hundreds of.
And
Speak-
a lot of, I'm sorry.
So speaking of, you said guardrails. How are there any guardrails for when somebody just uploads music to a DSP? Is there any verification process that the person that uploaded that actually owns it?
No, and I can't wrap my head around a way that there ever could be, because just imagine the scale of Spotify getting 60,000 new tracks a day. How could they possibly say, show me your legal proof that you own this? Yeah. So no, there isn't. I don't think there ever will be.
There was an article out not that long ago that talked about how some new artists or emerging artists were using the aggregators, and they were uploading songs, and they'd be like, featured artist Nelly. And Nelly never met them,
But there's consequences, though.
Yeah.
I mean, so when suppliers like DistroKid and other companies supply to Spotify and Apple Music, that is a contractual relationship, and Apple Music actually issues suppliers report cards that says, like, there are problems with what you're submitting. And if it turns out that one of their suppliers keeps getting takedown notices, keeps being, caught up in infringement and bad behavior, they can say, we won't take your content anymore. Or, we're gonna shut you down, and now we're gonna add a bunch of QA processes, quality assurance processes, and not just take what you send us, we're gonna look at it. So there's an ability through the contracts that those digital music services have with their suppliers to put pressure against a supplier that's a continual bad actor. We don't see that. That doesn't play out in the public, but I have every reason to believe that does happen in the background. And while if you even go on Apple Music, I think, and Spotify, they list a small list of trusted suppliers, actually, that get that categorization because they don't send us stuff with a bunch of problems. So I don't think you'll end up with a legal regulation, but it comes down to a contractual relationship with, if this supplier is problematic enough, it's just one legal problem after another, any of those services can say, we're not dealing with you anymore.
More questions? Yes.
As a vocalist, songwriter, if I want to repurpose the song and a music library asks for stems and the instrumental and everything else, how can I have the same tag or metadata for all of those pieces of instrumental, the whole MP3? Would I do that through the DAW and then just bounce everything from the DAW, and that would provide the same metadata for all of that, all those files?
I think you'd want to, well, essentially we're talking about a song that you wrote.
Right.
And now you've recorded, and each separate recording that you create of that song is a separate derivative work of that song.
Right.
So anytime any of those pieces of those different alts that you've created is used, essentially that song is being used. So that links back to song level, like a performance royalty or something. But so for tagging each of those separate recordings, there's the notion of a unique recording ID, and that is used as that's the ISRC, International Standard Recording Code, that if you're distributing, you can assign it yourself, or a label will assign it. If you upload through DistroKid or TuneCore, they'll assign it. But
But I think the thing that you're talking about, though, is now a piece of a recording that's going to end up in a larger recording. So, right, it's a stem. You're sending them a stem, and now they're incorporating it into the total recording. And I don't know that the metadata you send with that stem is going to end up in the metadata for the ultimately resulting recording. It's going to have its own ISRC and its own credits to travel with it.
So, but his piece, if he took that one stem, it's got its own ISRC, right? And then it's combined. It does,
but that doesn't travel. Like when you, let's say, pick a popular track recording, and it might include a sample of somebody else's recording. The ISRC of that sampled recording doesn't tend to travel with the recording that's using it. It doesn't like come along like this is the ISRC for the main one, and then
the
there's
derivative
like 5
work
sub ones. It
will
doesn't
have
carry
its
it
own
all.
ISRC, and then
Correct. It
it's
doesn't
got
necessarily
information
carry it.
inside. I think that's sort of the interesting challenge of like the future of all this is like, especially when you get to things like TikTok, where people are creating derivative works of derivative works of derivative works, and you suddenly have this video with like 100 people's property in it. How's that all going to get tracked, and how's that all going to pay out to the right places?
And are you going to get paid?
Just having like the alt tracks of one sound recording. And I would say it's probably even possibly before I get the ISRC, because I wouldn't be submitted through an aggregator just yet.
You're talking about sending it to a production library?
Right.
And the production library will assign an ISRC when they get it, correct?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, sign.
Okay. So yeah, I guess what I was really asking is if I'm doing the metadata in the DAW, that's not going to just, everything I'm exporting from that DAW is not going to be tagged with the same metadata.
Do you mean will it travel to the next use of it?
Well, just no, if they're just going to use the instrumental and I just bounce the instrumental from the DAW, it's not going to be the same metadata that it would be for the overall song.
I think there's value in that data going to the place you're sending it to, because hopefully they're using it in a way that makes money and they want to make sure you get paid, right? So there's definitely value in exporting it any place you send the stems or anything like that to, but don't count on the next piece of work that comes from your stems to have that metadata.
And then one more question. So for my social media, I'll get tagged by TikTok for using my own song. And is that do you guys think that's the YouTube fingerprint that's kind of running its course?
Wait, did you say TikTok?
Yeah.
You'll
so
get tagged on
I
TikTok?
submitted it through an aggregator, through DistroKid.
Uh-huh.
And then I'll try to create content using my songs, and they'll flag me for using my own songs.
That means it's working, right? The fingerprint?
Yeah, it's working. Yeah. The system works. So I believe in DistroKid there is, so it's kind of a catch-22 for you. So because if you tick the box that says make this available, find it when it's used on TikTok, in DistroKid, it's going to find you. But if you untick that box, then you can upload it, but so can everybody else, and you not get paid. So I think, I don't know the exact solution for it. You're going to have to go sort of platform by platform for what's going to be the greater value. It's worth a question to your aggregator to say, okay, you can't be the only one in this problem, right? Yeah. So it's worth a question to your aggregator to say, if I tick this box, which series of boxes do I tick? So I can upload it to my TikTok and get paid, and which ones to block everybody else or allow everybody else. Like, it's worth the question to them.
But is it a problem for you?
It is, because I'll be creating content with my song,
Okay.
Flagged as in monetize or flagged as in has to come down? Because if you told DistroKid monetize and just pay me, that's how you'll get
Yeah.
paid. Otherwise, it'll set it on your own social and not make you any money.
Well, it also could be who's working on your publishing, because it's two copyrights, your master and your publishing. And TikTok goes through music reports for its blanket license for publishing. So if your publishing is not up on music reports as cleared work, TikTok has to block it. So you got to have both sides represented at TikTok to work, for it to work at all.
Okay, let's take some more questions.
Can't be like, this is my channel, just let me do whatever.
No.
And you won't get
No.
paid that way.
And you won't get paid.
Yeah.
But by the way, just last thing, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, they do not talk to each other. They don't share
They
the
don't.
fingerprints.
Okay.
Every platform is separate from the other platform. There's
they're
no
all separate.
crossover.
Get my
Have
business
your-
card.
Did you still want to ask a question?
Well, I was just going to point out to those of us who inadvertently missed checking that box to get into TikTok. TikTok has the Sound On service, which is their music service that you can register your stuff on, which I do.
Yeah, I want it on there. I just want that.
Yes, it's so fun to have all you guys in one place.
Yeah, for sure.
I got a question I know that affects all of us. I've heard authoritative voices say that, hey, royalty-free is the end of the world. This is just going to be the end of our business. I've heard other guys say, it's a race to the bottom. When they catch up with that, it's going to be no big deal. I would love to hear your opinion. None of us has a crystal ball. I'd love to hear your opinion on the impact of royalty-free music.
Well, I've heard that too, David, but, royalty-free has actually been around for quite a while, and guess what? The music business hasn't tanked. And so my view is I like to work through the PROs, and, they were set up for a reason in this country to reward writers and publishers. And by the way, I don't see the PROs going away anytime soon. And so my view of it is I think, royalty-free and traditional music publishing and production music, they've existed, both of them have existed for quite a while. So I don't see it as the end. That's my opinion.
I've been in this business a long time, since I was a kid. I can remember when cassette tapes were gonna destroy a whole music industry. Like, I remember that, that was like this big fear. And I just go back to that. Like, just because something's new or different, I remember, those guys in college that I can't think of the name, Napster. Napster's gonna completely destroy the music industry, yet here we are. Here we all are. And I think it's kind of the same phenomenon. Yeah, yes, it's there. Yes, it makes us think. It makes us think about what we're doing and how can we do it better and all these things. And it makes us innovate. And I don't know where it's going to go, and I don't know how it's going to change the business. But certainly there's going to be some change affected, but I'm not afraid of it. That's my opinion.
And I think the bigger users of music and production music, they like writers to be paid. They like publishers to be paid. And yeah, you could maybe find a channel that is using royalty-free music, but I don't know, that's my view.
It sounds like royalty-free music, There are a lot of, I've talked to some music supervisors who are like, I can't afford music. I've got to go the cheapest route because they give me no money. And that same music supervisor said to me, I'm sorry, you're going to watch this show and the music's going to suck. Like, straight up. And so you're going to get what you pay for. And the industry's it'll shift and tweak because of it. But you shouldn't be afraid of it.
We can take one more. I'm going to call on Jay. But, some of us can be around later if you really have something burning. Yes?
We've spoken a lot. Well, let's focus on the DSPs again for a minute. We've spoken a lot about how to have all the proper data in there and all the identifiers so everybody gets paid. So let's assume all the identifiers, all the data, everything is perfect, it's done perfectly. If we're going to talk about the future of sync music royalties, let's talk about what you're actually getting paid when all of this is in progress and it's actually being processed properly. Because what is the future of payment for a composer? Because right now,
minuscule. Everything is not minuscule.
Well, let's, you know,
Okay, so performance royalties for broadcast can still be, there's a chunk of change.
yeah, I'm talking about DSPs, right?
Okay, got it.
Broadcast is great,
So,
because we've spent a lot of time on DSPs, so let's
Right.
address that.
go for it.
Well, I don't know if I'm the best because most of our business is focused on the sync side, but I'd say generally what we expect is that we need, there's going to be higher volume, lower dollar amounts per as we're moving from, license by license model to more subscription models, and we need to get together and advocate for those rates to continue to remain the same or get higher from the broad perspective.
So I think, Jay, what you're getting at is the rate for DSPs on Spotify are so low. But, I think this is where the PMA and the IPMG and the NMPA, all of us together are always trying to advocate for higher rates. And by the way, look what what David has done at the Music Publishers Association. He's had some great settlements for publishers and composers. So I think this organization, the PMA, and all these companies need to continue to advocate for better rates and settlements because they are happening, and that's why I'm glad you guys are here. And by the way, I think the Music Publishers Association with David Israelite is a great organization, and so you publishers, I encourage you to join. I think
Even
it's
if you're a composer with your own publishing company, join the NMPA.
I encourage composers, raise your hands again. Composers. All of you need to go and sign up with Songwriters of North America, SONA. They fight. They fight for you guys. They fight. It's organized by songwriters and is run by songwriters. And I'm blessed to be able to do a lot of educational programs with them. You can find all of this great stuff to help educate and arm yourself, because the best way to fight for higher rates is to know your enemy's argument. Know their argument. Get yourselves armed with the knowledge. And find out about SONA.
Okay, you guys, is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should before we get off the stage?
I just want to make one comment. Composers, you are all worthy. You are all worthy. Don't let anybody tell you that your 15-second to spec piece for some Tide commercial is not worthy. You're all making art, no matter how long it is, what it's used in, or anything else. You're all artists and you're all worthy.
Thank you.